My name is Bernice Holloway, and 5 days after I was discharged from the hospital, still bruised from surgery, stitches tight across my belly, painkillers barely holding the pain at bay, my son dropped me off at a motel and said, "It's just for a few nights, Mom. You'll be fine." You might actually regret missing out on this dramatic story. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. The motel smelled like bleach and loneliness. Room 104. Ground floor. One window facing the parking lot, where the only view was a dumpster and a flickering street lamp. He didn't come in. He didn't ask if I had groceries, or if the room had a microwave, or even if I could manage the steps without help. He just popped the trunk, helped me carry my bag to the door, kissed my forehead like an afterthought, and said, "We'll check in soon. You'll have some space to rest." Space. That's what he called it. But I knew what it was. Distance. Avoidance. Shame. He didn't want me in his new house with his new wife. Didn't want me in their guest room. Didn't want me in the way. The room was cold. The kind of cold that lives in thin sheets and older tiles. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the closed door. I could still hear the tires crunching over gravel as Nathan drove away. I reached for the motel phone. No dial tone. Only a sticky note taped to the side. To dial out, press 9. Long distance not available. Long distance. My own son was now long distance, even though he lived 12 minutes away. I didn't cry that first night. I waited until the next morning when I realized no one was coming. No good morning call. No breakfast tray. No Kayla with a homemade smoothie and a list of anti-inflammatory recipes like she used to email me back when she was still trying to impress me. There was a paper bag on the dresser. Inside, a microwaved cup of soup, a banana, and a folded receipt. No note. I sat there with the soup in my lap staring at the wall. That's when the pain hit, not just the kind from the incision, but the kind that reaches bone deep. Because there's a very specific kind of grief that happens when you realize the person you raised doesn't see you anymore. Not as a mother, not even as a person. Just a problem. By day 3, I had run out of medication. I called Nathan, straight to voicemail. I left a message. "Hi, sweetheart, I'm out of the Tylenol codeine. Could you drop some off?" No reply. I waited 4 hours. Then took a cab to the pharmacy myself, clutching my medical papers and limping through the aisles while a young man in scrubs watched me like I might fall over and break. I returned to the motel drenched in sweat, dizzy and ashamed. The front desk manager, a quiet man named Kavi, saw me struggling and offered to help me carry my bag to the room. When he asked, "Where's your family?" I smiled and said, "Running errands," because it was easier than telling the truth. They had run from me. I showered that night. Every movement burned. I stood under the weak spray of water, my arm braced against the tile, watching the water swirl toward the drain, carrying little bits of soap, pain, and pride with it. And then I made a decision. No more waiting. No more hoping. No more making excuses for people who had clearly stopped making room for me. I dried off, sat at the cheap motel desk, pulled a pen from my purse, and opened my planner. I turned to the back where I kept my emergency notes, the ones Arthur and I had made together before he passed. Account numbers. Contact for our old lawyer. The original will. A copy of the property deed. That will hadn't been updated in years. And guess who it still favored? Nathan. Every last cent. I stared at his name. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long, long time. I laughed. Not the happy kind. The kind you let out when the absurdity finally stops hurting and just starts looking like a bad joke. He left me in a motel after surgery. But I had left him a house, 2 accounts, and a pension fund. Not anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I made a list. It was titled, "Things I Still Have Control Over." My name, my memory, my signature, my story, my will. I circled the last one, and then I underlined it. Twice. The next morning, I woke up with a sharp pain in my side and an even sharper clarity in my mind. I didn't pack. I didn't call Nathan. I made myself a cup of motel coffee, burnt bitter, barely drinkable, and sat back down with my planner. Every time I felt the ache from my stitches, I leaned into it like a reminder. Don't soften, because women like me, We're taught to forget. We're taught to overlook and overgive and overstay our welcome just to keep the illusion of family intact. But I had nothing left to prove. Not to the son who forgot me. Not to the daughter-in-law who erased me. And not to a society that assumes a woman past 70 is no longer allowed to make her own decisions. I called the lawyer. His name was Graham Wallace. He was old school, wore suspenders, and had been the family's legal contact since Arthur and I bought our first house. I hadn't spoken to him in years. When I told him who I was, he chuckled. Bernice Holloway. Still sharper than my paralegal, I'll bet. What can I do for you? I need to rewrite my will, I said. Immediately. And privately. There was a pause. Then, good. I like when women say that with clarity. He offered to meet the next day. Not in an office. He would drive to me. Said he had a fondness for unpolished locations. I'm staying at a motel, I warned. He laughed again. Mrs. Holloway, I've signed $1 million deals in gas stations. If you've got a flat surface and a pen, we'll manage. That afternoon, I received a text from Nathan. Just one line. Hope you're resting. Things are hectic. Let us know if you need anything. Let us know. Not, how are you feeling? Not, do you have enough food, water, heat, medicine? Not even, I'll come check in. It was the kind of text you send to a neighbor who sprained an ankle, not to your mother who just had invasive surgery. I didn't reply. I just stared at the screen, then set the phone face down on the nightstand. I imagined it falling silent forever. And for once, that didn't scare me. When Graham arrived the next day, he brought pastries. From that cafe you used to love, he said, holding out a crinkled paper bag. I remember Arthur always said you liked the ones with the lemon glaze. He hadn't changed much, thinner hair, a few more creases around the eyes, but the same dry humor. We sat at the small round table near the motel window. He unfolded his leather folder and opened the old version of my will. This still lists Nathan as sole heir, he said, scanning it. And all property rights to be transferred upon your passing. I nodded. Do you want to revoke all inheritance? No, I said carefully. I want to redirect it. To whom? I smiled. Myself. He blinked. Explain. I want everything I own. Accounts, property, retirement fund, moved into a trust. One I control until my passing. After that, it goes to a few chosen causes. And maybe my grandson if he grows into someone who remembers his grandmother exists. Graham leaned back. You've thought this through, every night for the past 6 days. And you're sure? Absolutely. He started writing. While he worked, I watched the cars in the parking lot. People coming and going, most of them not paying attention to anything beyond their room numbers. I wondered how many other women had sat in places like this, overlooked, discarded, underestimated. I wanted to write them all letters. That evening, I microwaved the leftover lemon pastry Graham insisted I keep. It tasted like memory, like warmth, like a version of myself I thought I'd forgotten. And while I ate, I thought back to the moment in the hospital just before they discharged me. Nathan had been standing near the window, scrolling through his phone. Kayla had said, "It's not ideal, but she's independent. She can handle a few nights alone." I remember the nurse handing me the discharge papers, then whispering in my ear, "Do you have a ride and a warm place?" I had nodded, because I had always nodded. But I was done nodding now. The following morning, I walked slowly, carefully to the bus stop 3 blocks away. I needed fresh air, and I needed to reclaim my motion. I rode the bus to the library, not my neighborhood branch, but one farther out where no one knew my face. I asked for a computer terminal, logged in, typed one sentence into a blank document. He left me in a motel after my surgery, so I left him off my will. Then I hit save. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet, but I knew this was the beginning of a different kind of legacy, one I would write myself. By the end of the week, the motel manager started greeting me by name. "Morning, Mim," Holloway Covey would say, holding out the local paper with a polite nod. "You're still here, still here." It was meant kindly, but I heard the weight in it, the unspoken question behind his eyes. Why? I wanted to answer, because the people I gave everything to found me inconvenient. But I just smiled. Still here. My days took on a strange rhythm. I was healing physically, at least. The stitches no longer pulled every time I turned. I could get out of bed without the room spinning. The bruises faded to soft yellows and greens like a storm had passed through and was now apologizing. But emotionally, I was still storming, especially after what happened next. It was Sunday morning. Rain tapped gently on the window, and I had just made my way to the vending machine in the lobby when I saw them. Nathan and Kayla, in the parking lot, laughing. They weren't here for me. That much was clear. Kayla was dressed in leggings and a raincoat cradling a coffee cup. Nathan was in his gym clothes, phone in hand. A fitness class, maybe? Or brunch? My heart stuttered. They didn't look up, didn't even glance at the row of rooms, didn't realize I was 10 feet away behind a pane of streaked glass. I watched as Nathan opened the passenger door for her, kissed her temple, and drove off. I didn't cry. I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time I said the truth out loud. They abandoned me? It echoed off the beige walls. It rang hollow and real. I reached into the bottom of my suitcase and pulled out a box I hadn't opened since Arthur died. Inside, a small leather-bound Bible, 2 pressed roses from our wedding day, and a folded letter I'd never had the courage to read. Arthur's handwriting on the front. For Bernice, when you finally choose yourself. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside he had written, "My love, if you are holding this, I am gone. And if you are reading this, I fear something worse. You are alone. I don't mean physically. You've always known how to navigate a room with dignity and silence. But if you're reading this, I suspect you've been made to feel small, unseen, used, and that I cannot bear. So let me remind you, you were never just a wife. You are not just a mother. You are a woman who carried this family on her back. And if they forget it, then rewrite the story. From now on, live only for those who remember your name with love." The last line was underlined. And Bernice, if that means starting over, then start over, my darling. Start over. I didn't sleep that night. I reread the letter until the words blurred, and I could hear his voice again in the cadence of every line. And then I made another decision. I was done waiting for Nathan to wake up. He had shown me exactly who he was, and Arthur, even from the grave, was showing me exactly who I still could be. The next morning, I called Celia. She was the daughter of a woman I used to care for, Mrs. Alvarez, who passed away quietly in a hospice room 6 years ago. Celia had been just starting law school back then. Bright, driven, painfully polite. I had held her mother's hand while she read Celia's acceptance letter aloud. Now she was an estate attorney. I told her everything. About the motel, the abandonment, the will, Arthur's letter. She didn't ask if I was sure. She said, "I've been waiting for a woman like you to call me." We met the next day in the back office of a small community center where she volunteered. No marble floors, no gold nameplate. Just a table, a laptop, and a woman ready to help rewrite the ending. She slid a document across the table. "This is your new power of attorney," she said. And this, she tapped another file, is the language that removes Nathan as sole beneficiary. She looked at me. "We can redirect it all. You just tell me where." I paused. Then I said, "I want the money split 3 ways. 1/3 to a literacy fund for adult women, 1/3 to a community garden project, and 1/3 to my grandson, but only if he writes me 1 handwritten letter a year for the next 5 years. Celia smiled. "You don't just want revenge. You want remembrance." "Yes," I said. "And I want the remembering to cost something." As I signed the papers, I felt something click inside me like a lock opening after years of being rusted shut. This wasn't petty. This was clarity. Nathan left me in a motel. And now I was leaving him something too. A lesson. Written in ink. Filed in court. And sealed with silence. The air felt lighter after I signed those papers. Not because anything around me had changed. The motel still smelled like damp carpet. My side still ached where the stitches hadn't fully dissolved. Nathan still hadn't called. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to give me permission to matter. I had written my own permission slip. I walked back to the motel that afternoon and passed the same corner gas station where I used to fill Nathan's lunchbox with peanut butter crackers when he was small. He never remembered that. but I did. I remembered everything. That's the burden of mothers, we remember what they forget. And eventually we learn that our memories aren't currency. They're weight. And I was done carrying his. Later that week, I met a man named Walter. He drove a dented pickup and wore a baseball cap with frayed edges and the words, "I'm retired, do it yourself," stitched across the front. We crossed paths in the community center hallway. He'd just finished delivering a batch of folding chairs for the weekly AA meeting, and I was leaving Celia's office with my updated will. "Need help out?" he asked. I didn't, but I said yes. He walked me out to the sidewalk, noticed my limp, and said, "That from surgery or from life?" I smiled. "Bit of both." Walter didn't pry. He just nodded and said, "There's a church over on Maple. They let folks use the basement if they need a few days off the radar. Decent folks. Not nosy. Why are you telling me?" "Because you've got that look. The one where you still think you owe someone something." "You don't?" I didn't take him up on the offer right away, but I did walk by the church a few days later. It was a small white building with peeling paint and a garden that looked like it was surviving out of spite. A woman in rubber boots was pulling weeds from the flower bed, her face glowing with the stubborn pride of someone who didn't wait for perfect soil. Her name was Margaret. She ran the food pantry on Tuesdays and had been living in the apartment above the church since her husband passed. She offered me tea. I accepted. By the time we finished our second cup, she said, "You can stay here a few nights. It's not a motel, but it's clean. And it's not temporary if you don't want it to be." I moved in the next day. The church basement had low ceilings and tile floors, but it also had a small twin bed with a quilted blanket, a desk with a lamp, and a window that faced a patch of ivy climbing up the brick wall outside. It was the first place I'd been in weeks that didn't smell like abandonment. I unpacked what little I had: 2 cardigans, a worn paperback copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, Arthur's Bible, and the tin box of letters I had kept from him over the years. I placed the Bible on the desk spine facing the light. Not for show. For memory. Margaret introduced me to the other volunteers at the pantry. They were mostly women like me, retired, overlooked, underappreciated. But sharp. Oh, they were sharp. One woman, Linda, had been a seamstress for 40 years. She could still thread a needle without her glasses. Another, Joan, once ran a diner and could slice onions faster than anyone I'd ever seen. They didn't ask about my past. They just handed me a crate of apples and said, "You good with peeling?" I peeled, and for the first time in a long time, my hands felt useful without being exploited. A week later, Margaret handed me a small envelope with my name written in pen. Inside, a thank you note from a woman who'd picked up groceries from the pantry. "I don't know who packed my bag, but you gave me shampoo. No one ever thinks of that. You made me feel human again." I sat with that note for hours. And then, without thinking, I reached into my planner and removed Nathan's last text. The one that said, "Let us know if you need anything." I deleted it. I didn't need anything from him anymore. Not acknowledgement. Not apology. Not even absence. Because now I had something better than being remembered. I had remembered myself. The next morning, I called Celia again. "I want to add a clause," I said. "To the will. No, to the trust." I explained my idea. An annual grant to fund any woman over 60 who wanted to take a course: gardening, painting, computer skills, anything. No questions. No qualifications. Just choice. Celia called it revolutionary. I called it overdue. Because women like me had spent a lifetime being told what to do. And finally, I wanted someone to say, "What do you want to learn?" By the end of the week, I had a new name for the grant. The Holloway Clause. A quiet echo of a woman who had once been left behind and chose to become something no one could ignore. The day the first check from the Holloway Clause was mailed out, I bought a small bouquet of lilies from the corner vendor and walked to the city park. There was a bench there. Arthur and I used to visit every spring. We'd watch the ducks fight over crumbs, talk about the absurd price of movie popcorn, and imagine what retirement might look like. It never included this, but somehow, sitting there alone with lilies in one hand and a purpose in the other, it felt more honest than any dream we'd ever spoken aloud. Margaret joined me halfway through my coffee. She carried a folded newspaper and 2 apples. "They put your name in print," she said. sliding the page to me. Not the big paper, but the kind people actually read. There it was. Local Woman Funds. New grant empowering elder learners. They used my full name. Bernice Holloway. No title. No Mrs. No reference to Nathan. No mention of Kayla. Just me. The photo was grainy as snap from the community center's pantry, but I could see the glint in my eyes. That subtle steel? The kind forged in motel rooms and betrayal and lemon pastries and church basements. Later that day, my phone buzzed. Nathan. Again. But this time a voicemail. Mom, hey. Just saw something about your scholarship thing. Looks like you've been busy, I guess. I didn't realize you were, out there doing all that. A pause. We should talk. Kayla thinks maybe we could get dinner soon. Catch up. Josh misses you. Josh, my grandson. The same boy I once rocked to sleep while Kayla went to Pilates. The same child I hadn't seen in 9 months, not since the surgery. I listened to the rest of the message. No apology. No acknowledgement of the motel. No mention of how they left me with nothing but a half-eaten sandwich and a bottle of expired Tylenol. Just casual familiarity, as if I'd simply been on vacation. I didn't call back. Instead, I opened the drawer where I kept the envelope Celia had prepared for me, my revised will stamped and notarized. I reread the final clause. In the event that Mr. Nathan Holloway requests reconnection or inheritance without fulfilling the defined terms of personal contact and accountability, all claims shall be void. It wasn't punishment. It was precedent. Because letting someone hurt you twice isn't love. It's negligence. A week later, I received a letter, handwritten, from Josh. Dear Grandma B, Mom says you've been busy. Dad says you're mad. But I don't know why, because you always made me toast with cinnamon when I was sick and read me the fish book even when you were tired. School is okay. We did a project on kindness. I picked you. Love, Josh. P. Sis, what's a will? I cried. Not the kind of crying that empties you. The kind that softens. I called Celia. Tweak the clause, I said. Josh. Yes. He gets the savings bond in my name. And access to the trust. But only when he turns 21. And only if he sends me 1 letter a year until then. She paused. Same mailbox. No. A new one. I want him to write not Kayla, not Nathan, Josh. By now, the community pantry had become my second home. I organized the dry goods shelf and helped Margaret fix the leak above the fridge. I even started teaching a class on journaling every Friday. We called it Paper Trails. Women sat in folding chairs, told stories about the husbands who disappeared, the children who forgot them, and the friendships that saved their lives. Some cried. Some cursed. One woman burned her ex's apology letter in a pie tin. We clapped. I never moved back into my old house. Instead, I helped renovate an old duplex next to the church. Margaret moved into one unit, I took the other. We hung wind chimes between the windows and left a sign on the gate. Quiet women live here, until they don't. One morning, I passed the bakery where Kayla used to buy her overpriced croissants. Nathan was inside. He didn't see me, but I watched him through the glass. He was sitting with a realtor flipping through photos of a new development. He looked tired, more gray in the beard. Less confidence in the eyes. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. That night, I wrote a letter. To no one in particular. Dear forgotten woman, if they left you in the cold in a room with flickering lights and no return date, know this. You are not disposable. You are not invisible. You are the page-turner in your own novel. Reclaim your pen. Start over. Be loud quietly, and when they remember you again, smile like you never forgot yourself. I signed it with my full name, Bernice Holloway. Then I slid it into a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird and donated it to the library. Someone would find it, someday, and maybe just, maybe, she'd remember her name too. I didn't expect to become a local name, but sometimes the smallest acts echo in strange ways. 3 weeks after the newspaper article, I was invited to speak at a small women's conference hosted at the local community college. The theme, Unseen No More. Margaret found the invitation tucked into our church mailbox, written in purple ink on a note card folded around a Starbucks gift card. I laughed. You think they're bribing me? They're thanking you, she said. Go. I hadn't stood in front of a group since Arthur's memorial service. Even then, I'd barely managed 3 sentences before breaking down. But something inside me whispered, "You've survived worse." The auditorium held maybe 60 people, most of them women. Some students, others in their 60s and 70s. A few came up to me before the talk and said, "You're the Holloway Clause lady." I nodded. I didn't prepare a speech. I just told the truth about the motel, the surgery, the voicemail, the silence, the letters, the clause. And then I said this. They thought they left me with nothing, but they forgot nothing is where women build everything. Give us scraps and we'll quilt warmth. Give us silence and we'll write books. Give us a motel key and we'll turn it into a movement. When I finished, no one clapped immediately. There was just stillness. And then, one woman stood, then another, and another. They didn't just applaud. They saw me. I left that room with something I hadn't felt in years. Relevance. Celia called again that evening. You're on track to fund 6 more grants this year, she said. And one applicant wrote a poem as her reason. She read it aloud. My grandkids don't know my birthday. My son only calls when he needs help. But I remember how to draw, and I want to teach my fingers again. So give me a pencil. And a reason. Give me permission to matter. I couldn't stop smiling. But with visibility came another shadow. Nathan showed up at the church. I was tending the garden with Margaret knee-deep in tomato vines when I saw his car pull up. He looked around like a man trying to find his own name in someone else's story. "Mom," he called like this was a sitcom reunion. I didn't wave. He approached slowly, hands in pockets, Kayla in the passenger seat. "I just wanted to talk," he said. Margaret stood beside me like a sentry. She didn't speak. She didn't move. I wiped my gloves on my apron. "Talk about what?" He shifted. "About everything. The will. The trust." I didn't realize how far things had gone. I tilted my head. "Things didn't go. I did." He blinked. I went. "After you left me. After you decided my recovery wasn't worth 3 days of care. After you turned my life into a transaction." "Mom?" "No," I said, holding up one finger. "This isn't a negotiation." Silence. Then I asked the only question I needed to. "Did you come here because you miss me? Or because you miss the money?" His jaw tensed. "I thought so." I turned back to the vines. He left without another word. Kayla didn't even roll down the window. That night, I didn't cry. Didn't journal. Didn't call Celia. I just made lemon tea, sat in my small reading chair, and watched the ivy climb higher on the church wall. I thought of Arthur. Of Josh. Of the woman who wrote the poem. Of the folded letter in the copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. I thought, let the ones who didn't stay go. Because my life was no longer about being chosen. It was about choosing, and I was choosing peace. It was a Tuesday when I got the second letter from Josh. A small envelope addressed in uneven handwriting. My name spelled Grandma B. The stamp crooked but proud. Inside was a drawing of a treehouse. "This is where I would put your room, so we could read books when it rains. Dad says you're mad, but I think you're sad, and I miss you anyway. Love, Josh." I held the letter to my chest and let it rest there for a while. Not as a bandage, but as a proof of pulse. Something still beat for me in this world. I called Celia the next morning. "Move the bond to a private account in Josh's name," I said. "No access until he's 21, and make it unbreakable." She paused. "Even if Nathan contests, I'll burn the rest before I hand it to someone who left me with surgical drains and a vending machine dinner." There was a silence. Then a laugh. "You're the fiercest woman I know, Bernice." Not fierce. Just finally finished with everyone else's version of me. Later that day, I stopped by the bookstore where Arthur used to browse maps he never bought. I bought myself a journal, leather-bound, heavy, clean pages that didn't apologize for being blank. I wrote one sentence on the first page. My son left me in a motel after my surgery, so I left him off my will. Then I wrote another, but my grandson sent me a treehouse. That same week, the community pantry had its busiest afternoon yet. A woman named Rosa brought her teenage daughter to volunteer. Another named Missy donated a trunk full of canned beans and blankets. And Linda, the seamstress, stitched tiny felt birds to give away to anyone who looked like they needed company. I watched as one of the birds found its way into the pocket of a young mother holding twins. She smiled as she tucked it away. Margaret leaned in and whispered, "Do you realize what you've built?" "No," I said softly. "I just got out of the way." I received a call from the local radio station. They wanted to interview me, the woman behind the Holloway clause. I said yes, as long as we didn't talk about Nathan. They agreed. The host, a warm-voiced man named Curtis, asked me, "What's the most surprising part of starting over?" I thought for a long moment, then said, "How loud healing can be. It creaks, it groans, it drags you across the floor some days, but then it makes a home." He was quiet, then replied, "That's going to stay with me." After the interview aired, I received 12 letters from women, some old, some young, some who had just left their husbands, some who hadn't yet found the strength. One letter read, "Your story didn't give me courage. It reminded me I already had it. Thank you for lighting the match. Now I'm walking away." And this time, not quietly. On the 1-year anniversary of my surgery, I returned to the hospital, not to visit anyone, just to walk the halls, to breathe in the antiseptic, to stand at the exact spot where Kayla handed me my bag and said, "We'll swing by tomorrow." They never did. And now, they never will. Not on my terms. I donated a bench to the hospital courtyard. Inscribed on the back, "You did not break me. You introduced me to the woman who would not bend." The same afternoon, I found an envelope tucked under my door. It was from Josh. "We made a robot in class today. I named him BB after you. He doesn't work right, but he tries hard. Dad says you're busy. I think you're better. Love, Josh. P. C. Do you still like toast with cinnamon?" I folded the letter and slid it into the front of my journal. And this time I didn't cry, because I wasn't mourning anymore. I was harvesting all the seeds I had sown in motel silence, in pantry work, in rewritten wills, and ironed courage. They were blooming, quietly, beautifully, unapologetically. I never planned to become someone people quoted. But when your pain gets printed, when your silence starts echoing, you realize that survival when voiced becomes scripture for the unheard. A month after the radio interview, a local high school teacher invited me to speak to her senior civics class. "They're jaded," she warned. "Everything's a meme to them." I told her that was fine. I once raised a son who thought please was optional and thank you was vintage. So I showed up, in my cardigan and boots, hair pulled back, no makeup. Just me. The classroom smelled like pencil shavings and hallway perfume. Some kids whispered, some scrolled. One asked if I was famous. I stood in front of the whiteboard and wrote, "I was left in a motel after surgery. Now I leave legacies, not leftovers." Silence. Then I began. I told them how I trusted the wrong people, how I'd once measured motherhood by how much I gave away, how I found out the hard way that love without respect is emotional foreclosure. Then I told them how I rewrote my life, starting with one signature, one clause, one cup of pantry coffee at a time. A girl in the back with electric blue hair and chipped nails raised her hand. "Did it hurt?" she asked. "Choosing yourself." I nodded. Yes, at first, because I thought it meant losing everyone. But then I realized I had already lost those who never truly saw me. What I gained was myself. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away. And that meant something. After the talk, a boy approached me. 17 maybe? "My grandma raised me," he said. "She's quiet like you, but fierce, like hurricane fierce." I smiled. "Then thank her. And don't make her wait until she's gone to know she mattered." He nodded. "You think she'd like cinnamon toast?" That made me laugh. Back home, Margaret and I were prepping winter kits for the community pantry. Gloves, socks, heat packs. We placed handwritten notes inside each bag. "You are not invisible. This world is lucky to have you still in it. Breathe. You've survived every breath before this one." Linda the seamstress stitched tiny red hearts on the bag's zippers. Joan baked oatmeal cookies and snuck one into each kit. We weren't saving the world, but we were softening it. And sometimes that's enough. Then came the letter from Nathan, typed, formal, delivered by certified mail. "I understand you've revised the terms of your will." I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss the decisions made, particularly as they affect family inheritance and future claims. No, dear Mom. No, I'm sorry. Just entitlement dressed as civility. I didn't respond. I forwarded the letter to Celia with a note. Handle this like you would a spoiled onion firm toss. She replied with a thumbs up emoji. A week later, Josh sent me another note. We learned how to make grilled cheese, but it was boring without your tomato soup. Dad is grumpy. Mom is always on her phone. I wrote a story in class about a grandma who builds a castle from soup cans. It wins, even if it doesn't. Love, Josh. I pinned it on the fridge, next to my will. Next to the Holloway Claus logo mock-up Margaret helped me design. Next to a photo of me holding a cardboard sign that read, "You didn't break me. You broke the illusion. Thank you." That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees. The wind chimes danced above me. The street was quiet. And for the first time in years, I realized something profound. My story didn't end when they left me. It began when I stayed with myself. And I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Spring came early. The snow melted like an apology, and yellow daffodils sprouted near the corner of the duplex garden where Arthur once tried and failed to grow tomatoes. I planted them anyway, not for him, not for anyone, but for the woman I was becoming, a woman who no longer needed a family to define her or a legacy built on pleasing the ungrateful. I was building a new kind of inheritance, one made of action, memory, and choices nobody could reverse. Margaret and I hosted our first porch poetry night. 10 women, 3 folding chairs short, 1 runaway cat who wandered through and stayed. We read poems about loneliness, about love that bruised instead of healed, and one about a woman who left her cheating husband by gluing glitter into all his power tools. We roared. We wept. We passed around lavender tea and laughed so hard we forgot who we were angry at. A week later, I got a text. Unknown number. You're turning Josh against us. He's writing stories about you. His teacher called. You're manipulating him. You need to stop. It was Kayla, of course, because the loudest silence is when a mirror is held up to the selfish and they hate what they see. I didn't reply. Instead, I wrote a thank you card to Josh's teacher. I enclosed a donation for her classroom library and a sticky note. Thank you for letting my grandson's imagination bloom. He comes from weeds. Later that month, I received a letter. Official. Stamped. From a nonprofit I'd never heard of. The Women Who Stayed. They'd heard my radio interview. Someone had passed them my Holloway Clause outline. They wanted to build an initiative around it. Would I be open to mentoring? Would I like to write the mission statement? Would I be the face of it? I blinked. I was 74, still wearing hand-me-down wool sweaters and writing on diner napkins. But somehow, I had become a beacon. I called Celia. She cried. Write it, she said. Write the statement. And don't be modest. Not this time. So I did. Mission statement. The women who stayed. We are not leftovers. We are not relics. We are the map makers of what comes after the silence. You took our labor, our loyalty, our lullabies. Now we take back the narrative. We are not vengeful. We are vivid. And we are never disposable. Margaret bought a bottle of cheap champagne. We toasted on the porch with mismatched mugs. And then, as if on cue, Josh appeared holding the hand of a nervous-looking woman. Grandma B, he said, this is my teacher, Miss Landon. Miss Landon blushed. He insisted I meet you. Said I couldn't teach real stories unless I knew one. I smiled. Josh gives good homework. We sat. We talked. She left with a copy of the journal I'd started. Inside I had written, Lesson 1. Your voice is enough. But if it shakes, let it sing anyway. That night, Josh helped me plant more daffodil bulbs. Next spring, he said they'll be ready. Just like you, I whispered. He didn't hear, but maybe he did. I went inside, sat at my desk, opened my will, made one last change. In addition to the trust for Joshua Holloway, a portion of my estate shall be allocated to the women who stayed. Let it bloom where it is needed most. Let it remind them that someone somewhere stayed. I woke up to a knock on the door. Not the timid kind. Not the neighbor with a package kind. A knock that said, I came to reclaim something that was never mine. I opened the door. Nathan stood there, alone. No Kayla, no briefcase. Just a man with tired eyes and a mouth full of reasons. Mom. I didn't move. Didn't invite him in. I got the letter from the lawyer, he continued. You're really taking me out of everything. I raised an eyebrow. Now you believe it. He stepped back, like the truth was heavier than he expected. I didn't think you'd go through with it, he muttered. I mean, it was just one mistake. One mistake, I said quietly. You mean leaving your mother in a motel with stitches and a styrofoam cup of soup? His face tightened. I had to work. Kayla was busy. We didn't know it would matter that much. You didn't care if it mattered, I corrected. And that's the difference. He sighed. Look, I came because Josh won't stop talking about you. Writing about you. He wants to visit you more than us. You've poisoned him. I laughed. Not a bitter laugh. A knowing one. I didn't poison him, Nathan. I watered what you forgot to feed. That shut him up. He stepped closer. I know I made mistakes. No, I said. You made choices. Stop dressing them in softer clothes. He paused. What do you want me to say? Nothing, I replied. That's the point. I don't want anything from you anymore. Not your guilt. Not your explanations. Not even your apology. I turned to go back inside, then stopped. But since you're here, let me say thank you. He blinked. For what? For setting me free. From duty. From illusions. From the lie that blood is enough. And then I closed the door. Gently. Finally. That night, Josh and I baked cinnamon toast. We ate it sitting on the floor like campers. He read me a new story he'd written. There was a castle made of glass bottles. The queen lived alone but wasn't lonely, because sometimes the world forgets to thank the quiet ones. But not anymore. I clapped. He bowed. Later, I sat at my desk with the journal, wrote a single line. He left me in a motel. I left him in the past. I turned the page, wrote another. But my grandson, he left me a future. Spring deepened. The garden bloomed wild. And so did I. The last frost melted like a whisper, and with it, the final weight I hadn't known I still carried. I sat on the back porch, a mug of lemon tea steaming in my hands, watching the wind tease the daffodils. Josh had helped plant those months ago, his tiny fingers pressing the bulbs into soil like secrets, into silence. He was coming over that afternoon. Kayla had finally agreed, albeit reluctantly, to a new custody arrangement. Just a few weekends, she'd said, her voice tight. We don't want him to get confused. Confused? No, my darling boy was the clearest soul I'd ever known. He arrived with a backpack, a box of colored pencils, and a plastic sword tucked in his waistband. Grandma B, he called as he ran up the walk. Guess what? I crouched to meet him. I wrote a play. You're in it. You're the one who saves the kingdom. I blinked. Oh, do I have a sword too? He grinned. No, you have a notebook. And you write spells that fix everything. I laughed, blinking back something much warmer than surprise. Well, I said that sounds about right. We built a pillow fort in the living room and read books by flashlight. He asked me if I was ever scared. All the time, I told him. But I do it anyway. Even when they left you. Yes, I whispered. Especially then. He nodded solemn, as if storing the answer for a future day when someone might try to leave him behind. After he went to bed, I sat by the fireplace with my journal, not to write, but to reflect. How far I'd come from motel linens and post-operative loneliness to this. A home of my own choosing. A will with no room for betrayal. A boy who saw me as the hero, not the burden. A few days later, I got a visit from Celia. She wore a navy blazer and a grin sharp enough to slice red tape. I just came from probate court, she said. Nathan tried to contest. My eyebrows rose. She waved a folder. Didn't get far. The Holloway clause is airtight, ironclad. And honestly, beautiful. The judge even complimented the wording. I felt a strange mix of pride and grief. How did Nathan take it? Celia shrugged. He's not used to consequences. We shared a long silence. Then she leaned in. But you're used to courage now. We went out to lunch at a cafe that served scones the size of saucers. The waitress, no older than 25, kept staring at me. Finally, she approached nervously. Are you the woman from the radio? The one with the story? About the will? I nodded. She fidgeted. I played your story for my mom. She left her boyfriend the next day. She said she felt seen for the first time. I reached across the table and touched her hand. She was always there, I said. My voice just reminded her. When I got home, Josh had drawn me another picture. This one showed a large woman in armor, not shiny, but sturdy. A little boy stood beside her, sword raised. The kingdom was quiet, but no one was scared anymore. I kept that drawing on the fridge, next to the radio schedule, next to my garden planting chart, next to the letter from the women who stayed inviting me to be the keynote speaker at their annual summit. Me, a keynote speaker, once left in a motel like forgotten luggage, now asked to speak to hundreds of women about courage, legacy, and silent reclamation. Celia said, "You've become their archetype. You know, the one who stayed." Then rose. I didn't know how to respond. All I could think was, what a strange, beautiful afterlife this is, being fully alive again. I told Josh I'd be away for a few days to give a talk. He made me a travel kit. 2 cinnamon sticks, a glow-in-the-dark sticker that said "Roar," and a folded note. "Grandma B, if you get nervous, remember, you're the queen. They just don't know it yet." I tucked it in my suitcase like armor. The summit was held in a quiet town upstate in a repurposed library-turned-conference hall. When I stepped onto the small stage, women looked up, some teary, some stern, all still listening. I started simply, "My name is Beatrice Holloway. I was once left in a motel room after surgery, and from that room I rebuilt a kingdom." A pause, a breath, and then I told them the story, not as a tragedy, but as a blueprint. The moment I realized my son's love was conditional. The hour I made peace with silence. The day I rewrote my will, and with it my worth. After the talk they stood, not for applause, but in shared recognition. One woman came up to me, hands trembling. "I've stayed with a man who's never said my name kindly in 20 years. Tomorrow I'm leaving." She pressed a tiny ring into my palm. "This was my grandmother's. She wore it through the worry. I want you to have it." I was stunned. "I can't." "You already have," she whispered. "You made me brave." That night, I sat by the window of my guest room at the Summit Lodge. Moonlight spilled over the pages of my journal. I wrote, "They left me behind, but I kept going forward. They closed the door, but I built a garden in front of it. They erased my name from the list, so I made my own and signed it in ink that doesn't fade." When I returned home, Josh ran into my arms. "Did they like your stories?" he asked. I held him tighter. "They didn't just like them," I said. "They saw themselves inside them." He grinned. "That's because you tell the truth." I smiled, brushing a leaf from his hair. "I try." Later that week, Margaret and I added a new mural to the community pantry wall. It showed a tree, gnarled, weathered, but blooming. Each branch bore the name of a woman who had once stayed, and then left healed or reclaimed something stolen. At the center of the tree, beneath twisted roots, were the words, "Let no one tell you again that your story is small." Summer settled in like an old friend. The garden buzzed with bees, the porch smelled of lemon balm and rosemary, and Josh spent his afternoons turning cardboard boxes into castles. One morning, I found him sitting on the front step, frowning at a shoebox full of rocks. "What are these?" I asked, crouching beside him. He poked one with a stick. "They're things I wish I could throw, but can't." I blinked. "Like what?" "This one's for when Dad said I was too sensitive. That one's for when Mom forgot my birthday. And this one's for when you cried and said you were fine, but I knew you weren't." I didn't answer right away, because how could I? So I picked up a flat gray stone and whispered, "This one's for the motel." He looked up, and then we buried them together under the daffodils. That night I called Celia. "I think I want to start a writing circle. For grandmothers. Women who need to speak but forgot how." She was quiet for a beat, then said, "You don't just write stories anymore. You unbury them." We launched the first session 2 weeks later. 5 women, 1 ceramic teapot, and a pile of unsent letters that had waited decades. Ruth brought a letter she'd written to the daughter who stopped calling after her wedding. Miriam brought the letter she never wrote to the husband who passed away before she could tell him she regretted staying silent for 42 years. Joanne, she wrote one to herself. "Dear me, I forgive you for shrinking." When it was my turn, I read aloud the letter I had written, but never sent to Nathan. You will not remember the motel, but I will never forget it. Not for vengeance, but for clarity. Because the day you walked away from me was the day I finally walked toward myself. Word spread. The group grew. We called ourselves the Porchlight Letters. Because no matter how long it took, someone always came home to a story. Sometimes it was themselves. Later that month, I received a small package. No return address. Inside, a photo. Nathan holding Josh both in front of a banner that read, "Reading is power." A sticky note was attached. I didn't get it before. Maybe I still don't. But Josh says you saved him. I believe him. No apology. No excuses. Just a beginning. A seed. I didn't reply. Not yet. Some things take time to bloom. Some truths aren't meant to be harvested early. And some forgiveness doesn't come in words, but in what we choose not to carry anymore. That night, I burned the first draft of my old will, watched the smoke rise, and thought, this is what letting go tastes like. Charred, but freeing. A letter arrived from the city attorney's office. I unfolded it slowly, expecting bureaucracy. What I got instead was a question wrapped in admiration. Miss Holloway, would you consider serving on the new Ethics Review Board for public guardianship cases? We believe your story and your standards could help reshape policy for vulnerable elders. I read it twice. Then again, me. The woman left in a motel. The woman who once sobbed into hospital sheets while her son didn't answer his phone. Yes, me. Because when the system fails you, sometimes the only way to fix it is to step inside and hold the flashlight. Margaret brought over cupcakes that night, lopsided and too sweet. We sat on the porch while cicadas hummed and Josh's drawing flapped on the fridge inside. I told her about the board offer. She blinked, then grinned. Do it? And make sure they give you a gavel. A loud one. I laughed. No gavels. Just paper. Just my voice. She clinked her glass of lemonade against mine. Even better. The pen is louder. Later, I stood alone in the garden, barefoot, breathing in the thick summer air. I thought of my mother, how she once told me, if you ever lose your place in the world, plant something. Then water it every day like it deserves to stay. I looked at the patch of daffodils. The patch where Josh and I had buried our throwing stones. They had bloomed early and stayed. I went inside and updated my will. Again, only 2 beneficiaries this time. Joshua Holloway. The Porchlight Letters Collective. I left the clause that would forever be called the Motel provision untouched. Any person who abandons a family member during medical distress shall be considered for the purposes of this document estranged and disqualified from inheritance. It wasn't punishment. It was preservation. It was my story protected by ink. Josh asked me the next day what the word legacy meant. I told him it's what's left when the talking stops. It's the echo, the seed, the story. He nodded, then handed me a new drawing. This one was simple. A tree. One root labeled truth, one branch labeled forgive, another labeled remember. At the top, grow anyway. I kissed his forehead. You're going to be a very inconvenient adult, Josh. He grinned. Like you. Exactly. The ethics board confirmed my appointment. The same week our writing circle hit 50 members. The same week Nathan sent a second package. This one contained something unexpected. The motel room receipt. Framed. No note. Just that. A memory returned, not as shame, but as acknowledgement. I placed it on a shelf beside my radio. Not to glorify the pain, but to show, this is how far we've come, and this is how much we refuse to go back. Autumn crept in softly. The leaves rusted gold, and the air turned crisp enough for cardigans and second thoughts. The porch light clicked on at dusk without me touching it, a setting Josh had configured in case you forget Grandma. I didn't forget, but it was nice to be remembered. We held our final Porchlight Letters gathering of the year under the pergola, now wrapped in fairy lights and the scent of warm apple cider. 22 women sat in a circle. Some wore scarves that once belonged to someone who hurt them. Some wore no makeup for the first time in decades. Every single one brought a letter. We called it our reclamation reading. One by one, they stood and read the words they never got to say. To husbands who broke more than dishes. To children who used love like a currency. To sisters who vanished during the hard seasons. I read mine last. To the woman I was. Dear B, you waited too long for someone to ask if you were okay. You gave too much because you thought that made you good. You disappeared in their stories while keeping them whole in yours. But look at you now. You're not the motel. You're not the surgery. You're not the receipt in a frame. You are the one who kept the light on, even when no one came home. Even when they told you to leave, you stayed. And then you grew anyway. Love, me. The applause was quiet, respectful. But the tears weren't. They fell openly like rain on dry earth. Afterward, a woman named Sheila approached me. You know what you did right, she said. I shook my head. You made silence feel safe again. Not scary, just ours. Josh slept over that weekend. He crawled into my bed after a nightmare and whispered, Grandma B, you're not going to leave, right? I kissed his hair. Never again, my love. Not until I'm done writing my story. Weeks passed. Nathan sent no more letters. And strangely, I didn't miss them. Because forgiveness doesn't always end with a reunion. Sometimes it ends with peace. And peace, my God, is louder than vengeance. One rainy Sunday, I played one of my old radio segments for Josh. He asked, Is that really your voice? I nodded. You sound like someone who knows everything. I laughed. I sound like someone who's finally not afraid to say something. He crawled into my lap. Good. Then you can teach me. So I did. I taught him how to write from the wound, but not bleed on the page. How to love fiercely but not foolishly. How to close the door without slamming it. And how to plant daffodils where the stones are buried. Always the daffodils. They left me in a motel. After surgery, with stitches still fresh and hope barely clinging to the corners of my heart. At the time, it felt like an end of motherhood, of worth, of everything I thought I meant to someone I gave everything for. But endings are rarely what they claim to be. Sometimes they're doorways. Sometimes they're the first truth you've ever spoken in silence. And that night alone with a thin motel blanket and the echo of abandonment, I found something unexpected. A blank page, and the courage to fill it on my terms. Not with revenge that screams, but with a will that whispers. I was here. I mattered. And I will not be forgotten. They may never say sorry. They may never change. But I did. I became the woman who built something sacred out of scraps. The woman who mothered her grandson with more wisdom than wounds. The woman who taught other women how to stop apologizing for surviving. Legacy is not who inherits your silver, it's who remembers your strength. And when they tell the story of Beatrice Holloway, I hope they don't focus on the motel or the surgery or the son who turned away. I hope they remember the daffodils, because they grew where the pain was buried. And that's how I know I didn't just survive. I lived, and I loved, and I chose not to disappear. So if you're listening, if someone made you feel small, you're not. You're a kingdom in bloom. And someone somewhere is waiting to read the story only you can write.